Marsha, do we have a couple of mics? All right. Doesn't look like this is ready to turn on. Good. Okay, got it. Perfect. All right, we're going to get started here. I will just introduce you. We have two gentlemen from the Dark Discoveries podcast, which is a history and true crime podcast based out of Lebanon, Indiana with us. This is Jimbo and Dustin. And we will let you guys get started and introduce our two panelists, who I very much want to thank for being here today. I'll just be over here if you need anything.
And Jimbo is the public speaker.
Oh, I guess. So first of all, we want to thank South Bank Theater and Marsha for giving us this opportunity. And what about Amalia? What an amazing
And now we've murdered your ears.
Wow, Belle. I didn't know, but she did a fantastic job playing that. Do you know, I think it took her over a year, if I'm not mistaken. She came on our podcast along with the lady that portrayed Belle. Lisa Smith came on our podcast to talk about this about a month ago. And the research that she did going into this, you would not believe everything that she did. She actually traveled to the port. She did a lot of backstory, historical stuff and everything. And if you want to find out about that, come on our podcast or download our podcast, listen to it. It was great. Oh, hi, Marsha.
So many mics.
So, you know, we're excited to be part of this Talkback because it's not just going to be us talking. You guys are going to have the opportunity. Dustin will come out there with a microphone, and you guys can ask questions as well. So, first off, we have Colleen Brandyberry. I hope I say that right. And you are a crime scene part of a crime scene investigation unit supervisor in Naperville, Illinois. We've all seen CSI depicts on TV, right? But
now's your time to ask all the questions about CSI.
But Colleen, can you tell us a little bit about what you actually do and what CSI really entails?
Sure. So I'm the unit supervisor. So I manage 5 crime scene investigators and 1 digital evidence technician. And the show isn't wrong. It just glamorizes it quite a bit. So typically, when a crime scene investigator shows up on scene, we are the only people on scene, aside from the first responding officers or paramedics if they were necessary. But other than that, like once they realize it's a crime scene, it basically gets shut down to the public. The opposite of what we saw in this case. And generally, the investigator will do a walkthrough with a detective or the first responding officer, get a general idea of what happened and what evidence we're looking for. And then we go through a whole series of steps to fully document the crime scene. We take a lot of photographs, both overalls, mid-range close-ups, and then we put down those yellow evidence markers that you do see on TV. We take a bunch more photographs with those markers in place, and then continue to document the scene with a sketch and measurements, and then collect the evidence, whatever we believe to be pertinent to the crime, and transport it back to a laboratory for further analysis. So it's very complex. They don't show that on TV, and they also don't show the immense amount of paperwork that's involved, because that's not glamorous and fun. So, like I said, the show's not wrong. It just simplifies the process a bit.
So you're telling me every case isn't solved within 60 minutes plus commercials? That's what I thought. Also, we have Andi Simmons. She's a forensic anthropologist and also now a lawyer. I'm scared of her. Who studied the Belle case.
We need her for our first cease and desist, so we're gonna keep her number.
Can you tell us how you first heard about the Belle case and how you got interested in forensic anthropology?
Yes, I actually grew up in the port. So as a child growing up in the port in the 1960s and 70s, Belle was kind of our local boogeyman. We all knew the story. We all knew about Belle. The stories that we were told as kids were way out of line in terms of anything actually true and accurate, but it was an interesting topic. I've been practicing law for 40 years, but 39. But after I'd been practicing for a couple of decades, I decided to go back to school and get a master's degree in forensic anthropology. For those of you who don't know what forensic anthropology is, it is, the master's program is like medical school, except your clinicals are on dead people. And similar to our expert here, anthropologists are called to the scene of crimes when the bodies are too far gone to go through autopsy. So generally they're decomposed, chopped, burned, scattered, exactly like the Gunnis crime scene. So if that happened today, it would be handled by forensic anthropologists working in conjunction with local forensic technicians and other forensic scientists, because any kind of crime scene also tends to involve things like ballistics and now, of course, DNA, molecular testing and all that sort of thing. When I went back to get my master's in forensic anthropology, I was telling my professor that I grew up in LaPorte and that there had been this unsolved serial homicide. He was surprised that he didn't know about it. I don't know if you know the name Dr. Stephen Naraki, but he for many years led the forensic anthropology department at the University of Indianapolis, which is an active crime investigation unit that works in conjunction with coroners and law enforcement. When I told him about Belle, he thought it would be a fun subject for a master's thesis. So I went up to LaPorte, got to know Bruce Johnson, who's sitting here, who's the LaPorte County historian, and started digging in the archives. One thing led to another, and to make a very long story short, it occurred to me that as an attorney, I might be able to jump through the red tape required to actually exhume the bodies. And so I did. And so actually on Halloween in 2008, we had all the permissions in place to go to Forest Home Cemetery in Chicago and exhume the body of the disputed Belle Gunnis. When we finally got that body out of the ground, we discovered when we peeled open the top of what remained of the lead lining of the casket that there were multiple individuals in one casket, and there were children's remains in the casket. That was very confusing to us, so we went back. We were also getting a Lilly Endowment grant for some of this work. We had to go through the whole process of all the red tape again with the state of Illinois and surrounding family members, et cetera, et cetera. We went back the following spring and exhumed the bodies of the 3 children that were also found in the home. So we took all of those remains to the University of Indianapolis. We ran them through CT scanners. We did all the molecular testing, all of the measuring, and did full forensic reviews of all the bodies. And I will say we were not able to rule out the body as Belle Gunnis because our data showed that the remains were between 5'4" and 5'8", and Belle was 5'8", so she was within the confidence interval of the body that we found, which meant we couldn't say it was or was not her. The remains were actually burned badly, but what was interesting to us is although the adults' remains were very badly burned, charred, there was still some soft tissue on the body that was badly charred. The children were in great shape. The 2 girls still had their braids intact, their hair was intact, their skulls were intact, the bodies were, they almost didn't look like they'd been through a fire. So whatever the accelerant was, whatever was fueling the fire somehow managed to burn the adult's body much more thoroughly than the children's bodies. Also, we were interested in looking at the cervical vertebrae because from looking at the other victims, we knew she was decapitating between the 6th and 7th cervical vertebrae. And so we were hoping we would find a clean cut on the torso, on the neck area of that adult to see if we could find any evidence that the head had been severed, but that part of the body was too badly burned, so we weren't able to determine from cut marks whether or not it was Belle. I want to say something else about the teeth. I thought that was a great photo. I've always really loved that photo because it demonstrates how intact that dentition was, and I do believe that that is her dentition. That is what was in Belle Gunnis's mouth when she was alive. It is interesting that the gold did not melt because you can't see them in the picture, but the bands that hold the porcelain together are gold, and they have a very low melting point. If the skull had been completely burned away, it is impossible to reconcile that with the gold remaining intact to hold those dentures together. Also, you may have noticed that there's a full root on one of those canine teeth and a partial root on the other, and that has a much lower burn point than porcelain does. But I think the most interesting thing about the teeth, and it's not something that you really read about in any of the sources, is that there's nothing holding the top row and the bottom row together. They were found together. So you have to ask yourself, how in the world the top and the bottom, they were put together for photography, but there's nothing connecting them to one another. So how in the world do the top and the bottoms end up found at the same moment, in the same place by this gold prospector at sea?
That's very interesting. A couple more questions before we come out there. So if you got a question, raise your hand. Dustin will make his way over there. But Colleen, we saw in the show tonight that the scene of Belle's murder farm was immediately a circus of curious visitors, with thousands having access to the carriage shed, morgue, if you will, and land where the bodies were being dug up. So I have a twofold question. Number one, how does this differ from a crime scene today? And how would a case of arson and discovery of a serial murderer burial ground be investigated today?
Well, pretty much exactly the opposite. Like I said before, generally in this day and age, once we realize that something is a crime scene, it gets shut down to anyone except the crime scene investigators and one or two detectives. And that was the opposite of what happened here. They kind of just let everybody come and look, and at the time, that was probably common practice because they were hoping that people coming would be able to identify the bodies that were found on the farm, because how else are you going to do it, in the 1900s? But yeah, today that would be handled very differently. And something this vast, with this many remains, we would have a whole team of people. Like Andi said, there'd be forensic anthropologists called in to assist us, and probably the FBI, since these are gentlemen coming from out of state. Anything that crosses state lines is somewhat FBI jurisdiction. So there would be, a team of crime scene investigators, a team of anthropologists, a team from the FBI, and just tons and tons of people actively working to preserve the evidence of the scene rather than, onlookers dismantling the evidence.
Taking some souvenir or something, right? Andi, you did a great job of answering my next question, but I'm just going to go ahead and throw this out there. Do you see any more evidence coming in the future that might provide more answers?
Yes.
So my personal question, this is what I want to know. I'll ask both of you. Do you guys think that Belle did indeed fake her own death? And if so, did she have an accomplice? We've heard stories about one of the police officers that may have helped her escape in his car. I don't know if it's true or not. But not only that, but do you think she stayed in the States, or do you think she went back overseas? And do you think that she ever stopped murdering for the rest of her life, or do you think she continued till the day she died?
Your question is interesting. I gave a lecture one time up in the port. It was a long time ago, and I think there were 300 or 400 people there. And I said, by a show of hands, who thinks that she got away? And pretty much everybody in the whole place raised their hand. And when I said, well, who thinks that she died in the fire, a handful of people raised their hands. My mentor at UIndy said that he thought that Occam's razor would dictate that she died in the fire. That would be the most, without any evidence beyond that we should think she died in the fire. I'm not so sure about that, because if she died in the fire, there are so many questions that can't be answered, and particularly if you just take you zoom in on that night and everything that went down in that house that day and that night and in the early morning hours. It almost is easier to solve this mystery, setting aside DNA, it is easier to solve this mystery if she got away. So I could answer it both ways in terms of if she got away, we don't know what happened to her. There was one case in California in the 1930s that got some attention, a woman who died in Los Angeles. They thought that maybe she was Belle because she killed a Norwegian man with poisoning, and that was, of course, Belle's MO was strychnine. But that woman was Swedish, she was too young, and they had census records in California that showed her she was there when Belle was killing back in Indiana, so that's not her. And that was the only really hopeful sighting of her after the fire.
So is there any credible sightings of her anywhere throughout the country or Norway?
No.
Just all speculation. You've already made me rethink everything I know about this. And does the evidence pertain to Indiana that you said may be coming out soon, or is that something
It's
maybe from somewhere else?
DNA.
So just DNA, okay. So now maybe I was wrong.
What about
She
you?
got
Do
away.
you think she got out or?
I tend to agree that the case as a whole is easier to explain if she did get out, you know, that she, you know, murdered someone, another female, to, you know, take the place of her body in this fire so that people would presume she was dead. If she was really beheaded and burned, it raises a lot more questions that we definitely don't have answers to, and probably would never find at this point. So I like to think that she got away.
Evil women, right?
Yeah.
Alright, so now, that's all the questions I had, so we're gonna come out to the audience. Dustin, if you wanna go up this side.
I can handle it.
Okay,
You don't have to
there you
climb
go.
all those stairs.
So anybody, right here in the front row, this gentleman right here, go
Mr.
ahead.
William, he can project.
Okay. You had said that when you exhumed the bodies, that inside supposedly her coffin, there were other children, and then you also exhumed so any ideas who all these kids were?
Yes. We were under the impression from records from the funeral home in the summer of 1908 that the bodies were kept separate. But what we now think happened was that they were allowed to partially decompose in a pile, and they were very sloppy in putting them into the 4 caskets. So there were 4 caskets that were brought to LaPorte to transport these bodies from LaPorte to Chicago, to the cemetery in Chicago. She already owned her cemetery plot in Chicago when the fire happened. All 4 of the caskets were lead lined. So we think what happened was because the bodies were decomposing, the funeral home just very quickly tossed the remains because they can get sticky and they can kind of melt together depending on the temperatures. We think that they just kind of pitched them into the caskets because we found parts of the adult in several of the children's caskets, and the parts that we found in the adult's casket belonged to Myrtle, Lucy, and Philip. So by the time it was all said and done, we were able to reassemble Myrtle, Lucy, and Philip into one, 3 skeletons with all their pieces and parts. The adult, as I said, was much more thoroughly burned and was missing half a leg, most of an arm, other elements, and the entire skull.
Who was Philip?
Philip was
The youngest.
I'm sorry, yes, Philip was 5. So at the time of the fire, Myrtle was 11, Lucy was 9, and Philip was 5.
Anybody else? I'll ask a question while somebody raise your hand and Amalia can make it to you. If Belle did indeed,
I'll throw in a
Die.
question or a mention. Okay, you can
if
go
Belle
ahead.
did indeed die, do you think Ray was the one that did it?
No, I don't think Real Fear had anything to do with it. I think she was setting him up. I think she got really scared because only a week before, she's getting these letters from Osley Hegeline saying, I'm gonna come figure out what happened to my brother. She's being harassed by Ray Fear's lawyer in that small claims court hearing over the second trespassing charge. I think that was why she went into town on the 27th and made such a big fuss about how she was afraid he was gonna do something, was because she had that whole plan.
I'm just going to talk about a couple of parallel cases. One really famous from the 19th century, the Benders of Kansas, who apparently did get away with it.
They did.
And then a more recent case in California, Dorothea Quentin, who had a rooming house and was living off the Social Security of the men that she poisoned. And as they were investigating the case, she actually walked away from the house with police permission and disappeared for 3 months before they finally rounded her up. She's in prison. She put out a cookbook.
What was her victim count?
What?
Was her victim count?
7.
7.
I sure hope it was foul
Very
food to
number
die
rose.
for, right?
In and around her rose garden.
That's right, they found them in the gardens. That's right.
And the roses never looked better, did they?
Holding up. And that's kind of an interesting thing, because if you've ever seen the moving frailty,
Mhm.
the rose garden at the end plays a little role in that, so. That's the only mention I have. Other than the fact that maybe the Baumeister case.
Yes, the Fox Hollow
Or
Farm.
another case.
Baumeister's interesting because he's one of the few, I think we can all agree he was a psychopath, homicidal psychopath, who committed suicide. They don't typically do that. I've consulted with some forensic psychiatrists and psychologists on Belle, and we've talked a lot about Baumeister because I find it interesting whether or not a serial killer like Belle would have committed suicide. They're usually narcissists, and they'll do anything to survive. They're great survival instincts.
Yeah, and there was a crossover kind of potentially between Eiler and Baumeister, because they were working the same area a decade apart.
Mm-hmm.
So who's here familiar with the Fox Hollow murders and Herb Baumeister? Anybody? Okay, Dustin and I just went this past Wednesday to an update. There was a case update. And what Herb Baumeister was is he was a serial killer that was married with 3 kids. His wife would go out of town. He would go downtown Indianapolis to the gay bars, lure them back to his house, and murder these guys, strangle them. They found and this was in 1996.
It's 15 right now.
Well, no, there's 11 confirmed people that they've identified as victims. There's one that they're working through 3,000 genealogy trees from DNA, and one from just this past week they got a DNA confirmation, so they got through that. There was 10,000 bones found on his property. They're only through 9,800 bones, so they still got that many more to go. So if you don't know about that, look that up. So any other questions out here? It's hard to see with this spotlight right here in the front, and then we got two up there.
I know you can.
Hello. So I forget the name of the equipment that most archaeologists would use just to survey the land and see if there are any like structures or bones or anything underneath. Was that used on this farm in the fort? Obviously there were just constant, like, a crap ton, I'm being good today, of bones everywhere, like where people were digging, but did anybody think to like go in the fringes of the farm and see if there might be a random skull anywhere?
Yes, so there's 2 devices. There's one called ground penetrating radar and another one called a magnetometer. You probably used both of those on scenes you worked at. Those were, of course, not available in the early 20th century, but there has been a lot of talk about doing a field school on the property. In 2019, I had permission of the property owner, the county authorities, and everybody I needed to, and I even had a free ground penetrating radar expert who was ready to step in and do a field school there. And then COVID hit, and it all got shut down, because I don't feel like the sheriff ever did a proper analysis of the property. He was running for re-election that year, and the whole thing was an embarrassment to him. Somehow, the town of LaPorte, and Bruce Johnson can talk about this, I think, more than I can. They took it real personally. I don't know that anybody ever thought that, oh, this happened because LaPorte was a bad place, but for whatever reason, because she wasn't from LaPorte and she was living out on a farm and didn't have anything to do with LaPorte other than that's where she happened to be. But the sheriff was really embarrassed about it, and he wanted that crime scene shut down very quickly. So there was never any thorough investigation done back in the day, but they didn't have the technology that we have now. So I think it would be really interesting to go back to the scene and see if there's anything else to be found there. But I also think it would be interesting to go to Pine Lake Cemetery, where all of those bits and pieces of unidentified remains ended up in the pauper section of the cemetery. If only we could find those coffins, but that's such a large area with graves that don't have any headstones on them that it would be very difficult to zero in. It's huge, like the size of a football field, to try to zero in on the coffins that came from the Guns crime scene, because it would be interesting to serialize the remains and see if we could get a better victim count. They didn't really make any attempt to do that back then, so.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Sure. What are some of the like horrific folklore stories that you have of Belle Dennis growing up in LaPorte?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, I think we actually knew what had happened. When I was a kid, we thought she was still alive. and that she was that she was a ghost, you know how kids are.
Like Bloody Mary kind of.
Yeah, that kind of, exactly. Instead of Bloody Mary, we had Belle, yeah. And I remember my friends and I used to go out to see the property, and try to, sneak on the property at night, only we had the wrong property. I didn't find out until years later that it was actually across the street and down the road a little bit. I thought it was next to the roller rink, Bruce, and it was actually not there at all. So and the county museum had a really good display of evidence from the crime scene when I was a kid, and they still do now, and it's a better one now than it was when I was little, but I remember going there as a child and looking at the evidence in the cases at the county museum below the courthouse from the crime scene, and I swear to God, they had those teeth in that case, and the teeth are now gone. But remember how I was obsessed about that?
I do remember.
Yes, because the evidence from the courthouse disappeared over time, and there were only a handful of primary documents and exhibits from the trial that are still left for us to analyze. I'd love to have those teeth. I do have the envelopes from all the letters that she wrote to Hedeline, because Hedeline's brother brought them back to a court with him and turned them into the sheriff, and now I have the envelopes. And we tried to get DNA out from under the stamps and under the seals, but didn't have any success.
Somebody have one up here? Yeah. We have time for one or two more. We want to try to wrap it up by 7, get everybody home. It's warm in here.
So my morbid question is, do we know what happened to the kids? Because theoretically it would make sense that they would be huddled with mom, right? Like in the crawl space, like everybody's scared, smoke, everything's happening. But it seems more like mom was already decapitated by the time she made it to the cellar. Highly unlikely that the kids would be scared and huddled with a headless body. I think that they would probably want to stay away from that. Is there any evidence that they were poisoned beforehand?
Yes, the stomach contents of all of the bodies that were found were sent to a toxicology lab in Chicago, and they all came back positive for strychnine in massive doses. Unfortunately, they didn't separate the stomachs, and so they were all analyzed together. We can't say exactly what dose each of the 4 of them got. But there were no injuries other than the burns. There were no injuries to the children. Cause of death seems to probably have been strychnine. And the handyman was playing board games with them before they went to bed, and Belle gave them all oranges. He didn't eat his, and so it's possible she somehow either injected or somehow got strychnine into the oranges. But strychnine is a very fast death, and it's also how she killed the first 2 kids in Chicago and the husbands and first husband. So that was kind of her MO, was to use strychnine. It's very fast acting, and it was found in the rat poison that was commonly used at the time.
And I think this gentleman right up here on the end we'll have him as the last question. I do believe he had his hand up.
Yeah.
Oh, we're going down here too. We got 2 more. Okay.
I'm just gonna say, Peter must have really pissed her off if she hit him with something. Just question.
I was only just wondering if any investigation had been done about what happened to her money. I know there was a fire, but, and I know she kept cash, but maybe that was something they would try to trace.
She had bank balances. Bruce, do you remember how much she still had in the
She
banks?
still had $700 in the savings bank, but all the rest of the money, I think she either put it under the bed or
Right.
coffee
Tucked
jar
in
and
the
took it
underwear.
with her. So.
Right.
But that's a pretty common thing that would be done nowadays, right, Colleen, to look at the money trail?
Yes, money is a very, very good trail, because that's one of the last things that you let go of, and also you don't realize how easy it is for investigators to track things like your credit cards and your bank accounts and like anywhere you go. So people will, especially if they're fleeing, will use what's fast, which is generally tap your card, and then that's very easy for investigators to track.
So too bad we didn't have any credit cards for either women or Belle at the time.
Bruce, you wanted to ask a question? Awesome. Everybody give a hand for Bruce, who is the LaPorte County historical historian. He helped me. I emailed LaPorte when I was starting this project, and I also went to meet with Bruce this this January. He was extremely key in helping me make some final changes. And also he is responsible for creating a memorial for the victims 100 years after. Many of them had not been memorialized in any way, and he was able to get some headstones and some acknowledgement for them and some closure for some extended family 100 years after these events. So I'm very pleased he could come join us.
Thank you very much. I wanted to mention Ashley Halgeling is truly the hero of this whole story. If it hadn't been for him insisting that he find out what happened to his brother, this could have gone on for who knows how long. So because of him being so insistent, following up on his brother, in fact, if I think of a Belle done this, I would never written back to him, but she did, and she stuck there. But because of him, he ended this, and I think a lot of people don't realize that after the fire happened, once the news was in the local newspaper, Frank Pittner, who was the banker, sent a copy of the newspaper to the brother, Ashley Halgeling in South Dakota. We think you ought to know about this. And he got on the train immediately and came to report. And went out to the farm and went to the sheriff and said, I wanted to go out to the farm and see if there's any clues my brother's been here. And then once they went to Joe Maxson, the other hired man, and said, we can't find any clues, but have you been burying anything on the property? He said, well, yes, I buried some garbage last March. I can show you where I buried it. So they went over and dug up the gunny sack that he had buried, pulled out tin cans, chicken feet, and all kinds of stuff, and then pulled out an arm and a leg. And then eventually there's the body parts and realized that that was his brother. So that's what, if that hadn't happened, all this other wouldn't have happened. So because of him coming to the port, insisting and finding about his brother, and then that's what opened the whole thing up, because they went and got the sheriff and said, let's keep digging. And so they dug right next to it, and that's where they found Jenny Olson, the 16-year-old foster daughter, on the date of her 18th birthday. But I wanted to mention too, just last winter, I was with a group of people. I've been with a lot of paranormal people and ghost trackers out at the property, and just last winter, there was a group who brought cadaver dogs out to the property, and they have found some spots they're going to be investigating. They've been through all the rules and going to the police department and everything, so I'm hoping maybe we might find something interesting, so, yeah.
I assume that would be a case where we would bring in forensic anthropologists as well. I'm sure you guys maybe would have something to wrap up, but I would really love if you would ask our two panelists about how they would approach continued research into this case.
Absolutely. We'll start with you, Colleen. If you're going right up there today, what would be the first thing that you would want to find out or take with you to further the research?
Because we have the resources in this day and age, I would not be there alone. I would bring some forensic anthropologists with me. I would really want to photograph the entire scene, like the entire farm from multiple different angles, any areas where bodies could have been buried. Like, clearly she had her favorite spots. But I would really want to search the entire property for any other potential items of evidence, honestly. Like, there's no house left, unfortunately, to go and investigate there, but
the house is actually it burned down, but the foundations of the house remained and were rebuilt upon, and a family lives there today. Yep. That's how Bruce has spent time with people doing paranormal investigations in the basement. That was likely where Belle dismembered these bodies.
Yeah, I was gonna say I would like to investigate the cellar or the basement, since that still remains. But yeah, mostly just photographs. That's what I would take.
Okay.
Well, I would handle it like a crime scene, I think, and use all of the techniques that she was describing before, which is to grid it off, to do good photography, and then to bring in the equipment that we need to make sure it's not just hit with a shovel and handled poorly. The family that lives there now, they've been there for a long time. Years ago, they built an ATV track. They took some sort of a backhoe or something, and they built an ATV track behind it, which disturbed ground, but I don't think it was the ground where we would have expected the bodies to be buried. She was primarily having privy pits dug, and then using those old privy pit holes for her trash and then for the bodies, and moving them around, and they were all pretty close to the house. And that part of the property is undisturbed. Other than one garage that was built, it's pretty much just like it looked in 1908. So it's right for a proper investigation with the right careful, analysis of the ground to see if we can find disturbed ground or other holes or that sort of thing. There have been, somebody asked me about, really gory stories. One of the stories I was told as a child was that she was feeding her human remains to her hogs. Because she was selling the hog meat in town, that was something people were freaking out about in the early 20th century, that the hog meat was contaminated with human remains, but I don't believe that she was actually doing that, because this was a very busy farm with kids coming and going and people delivering packages, and she was well enough off to afford gardeners to come, plant for her. I just can't imagine winging an arm or a leg into a hog pit and, hoping that the hogs take care of it in time that no one notices. That wasn't really her style. She was dismembering them probably in her basement. It had a dirt floor. And then probably doing that because she couldn't have carried the body all the way out by herself in one piece. I don't think there was any other reason for it, although I've talked to forensic experts about this, about the psychology of this. I think it was just practical. She was accustomed to butchering hogs, so butchering a human body to make it handier to get it out of the house wouldn't have been that difficult for her. But there's no evidence any of those bones were chewed on, either in the photography or in any of the reports from the day, any of the autopsies. There was no evidence of that. They were all buried.
All right, I think we're about ready to wrap it up. But one thing that Amalia, when you came on the podcast, we talked briefly about, the Chicago's World Fair was happening. And who was primarily the murderer? Do you think they ever crossed paths? And can you imagine the power couple that would have been, the insurance fraud and everything? Well, let's give a hand to Colleen and Andi. Fantastic job. Amalia, great job, thanks for having us. Dustin, Shawn Auditorium, and Martha, wherever she is. Thank you for having us. We are Dark Discoveries. If you want to look us up, we talk from everything from mermaids, we got poop stories, we got all kinds of stuff on there, poop cruises and stuff. But thanks for having us. Hope you all have a safe and enjoyable night. Be careful on the way home. Thank you.
Please tell your friends.
Oh yeah, tell your friends.